Good morning. I'm Barbara Ranney, and this morning's passage is Matthew 14, verses 13 to 21. But just before this, a little context. Just before this passage, Jesus found out that John the Baptist had been beheaded. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. When the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go to the village and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. As they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, and besides women and children. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Emma and Steve, thank you for that beautiful, I love that hymn. It's one of my favorites. Thank you. And Barbara, you stole my sermon. That little prelude, I mean, like, come on. No, it was wonderful. Thank you very much. I think one of the best theological comments on the feeding of the 5,000 that I've ever read was told by the Quaker theologian, author, thinker, Parker Palmer. Many of you may know Palmer and his writing and his work. The story that he tells about the feeding of the 5,000 takes place in a time long ago, fast receding in memory. I guess I'm showing my age. Pan Am, ring a bell? TWA, back when there were no security lines at airports, no electronic screening. You could carry pretty much whatever you wanted in your briefcase and your purse onto the plane. My wife and I were kind of talking about those days this last week. Palmer, on that particular day, was on a flight from O'Hare in Chicago to, I don't think they called it Stapleton then, to Denver Airport. And so the plane pulls away from the gate in Chicago and does what planes often do, is kind of just keeps going forever, and it's not taking off. And pretty soon you're out on the edge, and there's a wire fence right next to you, and you hear the engines of the plane start to come down, and then the pilot's voice. And your heart sinks. The pilot says, "I have some bad news. There's a storm front in the west." That's a John Denver song, isn't it? There's a storm out in the, oh no. The pilot comes on, he says, "I have some bad news. There's a storm front in the west." Which is exactly where we're heading. And Denver is socked in and shut down. And there are no alternatives. So we're going to be staying right here for a few hours. He said, "All right, that's the bad news." Now he says, "Let me give you the really bad news. There's no food on board." Ooh. Yeah, well, the people began to make sounds a little bit more than what the groans were real. But that's back in the day when we had cloth napkins and silverware. Some of us, I'm 80, some of us will remember those days. It was kind of nice traveling and kind of neat. Now you have to do first class to even remotely get something like that. But it used to be you could sit in the peanut gallery, and it was a pretty special event. You dressed up. Even just a shirt like this would not be enough. You dressed up to get on an airplane and make a trip. So everybody groans when they hear the pilot make the announcement. Some passengers even began to, let's just say, display rather arrogant personalities and privilege. But Palmer said one of the flight attendants stood up in the aisle and announced, "We're really sorry, folks. We didn't plan it this way, and we can't do anything about it." We know for some of you, this is a big deal. You're hungry. We're looking forward to a nice lunch. Some of you have medical conditions, and you need to eat with some regularity. Some of you don't care. But I have an idea, she said. We have a couple of empty bread baskets here on the plane. I'm going to pass them out. And what I want you to do is I want you to take whatever you have, if you can, and put it in this bread basket. We're going to pass them around. Whatever snack you brought, peanut butter crackers, candy bars, Rolaids, Lifesavers, chewing gum. And if you don't have anything edible, she said, put a business card in or a picture of your family or something, and let's just pass it around and see what we end up with. And when we get everything in, I'm going to pass the baskets back to you. And if there's something in the basket you need, take whatever he or she needs. Parker Palmer says as he tells the story, what happened next was really quite amazing. First, the complaining and griping stopped. People started to root around in their pockets and handbags and briefcases. Some stood up and got their luggage from the overhead racks, got out boxes of candy, salami, sausage, cheese, crackers, a bottle of wine, he said. And he said, now people were starting to laugh and talk. And the flight attendant had transformed a group of anxious people focused on their need, what they're being deprived of, their scarcity, into a giving, gracious community, sharing, and in the process creating an abundance of sorts. The flight eventually takes off, lands, and as Palmer's getting off the plane, he found the flight attendant and he said, "You know, there's a story in the Bible about what you did." She said, "I know that story. That's why I did it." Thank you for the reading of the story. It is a much-loved story. In the early Christian church, when the community gathered under the blanket of darkness to break bread and drink wine and remember Jesus, they always read this story about the day he fed the multitude with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But the context of the story we sometimes miss. You did not miss it this morning. But the context of the story is very important. It begins, hear these words again. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place. What was the this that prompted him to withdraw in a boat to a deserted place? Barbara told us the story. Jesus' cousin, his dearest friend, his lifelong companion, had not only just died, but had literally been decapitated by Herod. And the message has just arrived to Jesus about what has happened to John, his cousin. This person who baptized Jesus in the River Jordan. We know him in our study of the text as John the Baptist. He'd been arrested for publicly insulting and harassing King Herod. Now, John was well known, not only for what he wore and what he ate, but what he said. And in a terrible sequence of events, Herod becomes entranced by a young girl dancing in front of him. And he is so excited about her dance and what she's doing that he says that he will give her anything she wants. She asked King Herod for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And that's what he did. So John's followers bury him and then say, we must go find Jesus and tell him what has happened. It's brutal. It's appalling. It's terrifying. It must have stunned Jesus and broke his heart. John was family, cousin, childhood playmate, adolescent companion. They shared a deep faith and a fierce commitment to the promises of their people. And now in a bizarre moment, John is gone, murdered by a cruel and powerful tyrant who didn't like people to say bad things about him. And he had the power to act on those feelings. Sounds familiar. Matthew says, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Of course he did. That's what you do when you get devastating news. In addition to his personal grief, there was surely a new sense of his own vulnerability. This is what happens when you offend the powers that be. But the crowd that had been following him, listening to him teach, bringing their sick and lame and their children to be touched and healed and blessed, the crowd doesn't know what's just happened. They're not aware of what's happened to John. So they keep following him as he's walking toward the lakeside, this effort to get some private space for himself. They keep going. They follow him. And the disciples say, Jesus, send them away. It's time to take care of yourself. If ever anyone needed to be left alone, surely it's you. Besides, it's late in the day, Jesus, and they're all hungry. They need food. We'll tell them to go away, go into town and buy some food, then come back tomorrow morning and we'll all be prepared for them. But Jesus, as heartbroken and heartsick, has compassion. They need not go away, he says. You give the hungry something to eat. Seriously? 12 disciples are asked to feed 20,000 people. No, I know the text says 5,000, but read the text carefully. 5,000 men. It doesn't tell you how many people there. Scholars believe there were as many as 15 to 20,000 people there listening to Jesus. Barbara Brown Taylor says she wishes that she could have heard that conversation and seen the look on their faces when Jesus said, "You feed them," which is what he said. The task of feeding the hungry were to his followers. Not 5,000, but 15, 20,000, perhaps even more. No disrespect, Jesus, they say, but that doesn't make any sense. They were operating out of their own sense of scarcity. They looked at the crowd, assessed the need and their own resources, and came to the conclusion they didn't have enough. They couldn't meet this need. The thing about this familiar story for us to understand is Jesus did not feed the multitudes. The disciples did not feed the multitudes. This boy, although Matthew doesn't tell us it was a young boy who brought the loaves and the fish, up to Jesus. The Gospel of John is the only place you will see the boy mentioned, but he needs to have credit because he understood, even though it was everything he had, these people needed it more than he needed what he possessed. You give them something to eat, is what he said. And how did he do that? Scholars have concluded, and I'm comfortable with this reading of it, that we often read the story as this tells us the power of the miraculous power of Jesus, that Jesus could take a couple of fish and 5 loaves of bread and feed 20,000 people. Jesus did this. It was a miracle by Jesus. That really isn't what the text said. And many scholars are convinced that what actually happened was the boy shamed them, just like the widow with 2 mites. It was everything she had. The boy gave everything he had. And I'm convinced that the 5,000 men and the 20,000 men and women and children that were there saw what that boy was giving and knew that they too had something to give. Maybe it was something like what Parker Palmer was talking about on the airplane. Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament theologian, wrote, "You and I need bread to share because it is the work of Jesus to feed hungry people and express compassion, to make a concrete expression to the needs of others." This is a very powerful story, one that we often read without taking the time to see what's underneath it. I think what's underneath it is the command of Jesus, the responsibility that you and I have to feed the hungry, to take whatever resources we have and to share. And what happens from then is such a miraculous, miraculous story. And all ate and were filled, and they took what was left over. And it was 12 baskets. I'm going to add one more thing that you may have missed. How many disciples were there? 1 basket for each disciple to take and give. Thanks be to God.